I'm Alex Redfields. I'm the Policy Director for Wildlands, Woodlands, Farmlands, and Communities. This is the fourth time I've ever been to Connecticut in my life. Thanks for having me. I'm glad this song came out because it was pretty dreary introduction to Connecticut yesterday, so I'm glad to get a little chance to explore. Joined here by Susan and Michael. I'm going to ask you guys to introduce yourselves as well. Michael, do you want to go first? Just say Mike. No, don't worry about it. We're going to talk in a minute.
Maybe you should introduce himself when he comes up because I don't think it'll get picked up.
Okay. Great. Okay. This is Michael Keller. This is Susan Mosquino, and they're going to introduce themselves more thoroughly in a little while. The suspense, I can feel it in the room. And we're going to talk about old growth forests and how they are or aren't protected by local, state, and federal policy. We're going to do a little bit of a New England whirlwind tour to show some ideas of how other states are approaching the question. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what the active questions and concepts are, successes and challenges in Connecticut too. Yeah, that's what we're going to do. Does that sound great? Okay. Awesome. I'm going to start at the New England scale for a second. My organization, Wildlands, Woodlands, Farmlands, and Communities, took on a project a while ago of trying to think about what the region's landscape looks like in the future if we set aside enough room for a sustainable food system, a resilient ecosystem that meets the myriad needs that ecosystems provide, a forest products industry that continues to do what we need it to do, although it could look very different, and how much space do we need for us to continue to grow and build enough houses for all of our neighbors. The central question was, is there enough room in New England to do those things? The simple answer is yes, there's enough room, and there's a lot of messy details that comprise that vision, but just going to start with this future New England that is meeting all of our needs and the landscape that supports those needs, not just our needs, but non-human needs as well. It's a long way to go between a current landscape and a dreamy future, and we're going to talk about different elements of that future, specifically older forests and how they contribute to it and what we might want to do from here to there. This is maybe tricky to see. This is what the sort of land use framework looks like at the end of that research project. Some of it is based on pretty good science. Some of it is based on some pretty shaky science, and a lot of assumptions are made to come up with these numbers. We're going to focus on the green in the bottom, which should probably be bigger. Well, should be bigger than 7%. We're going to talk about that and why it's so important to focus on and how we can get to that 7% from the 2.5%-ish New England wide that we're at right now, and why that matters. And the reason we're going to talk about wildlands and old forests in particular in Connecticut is because of this map. This is, maybe tough to see the detail, but you don't really need to see the detail for this map. Red is where there is a high development threat, blue is where there's low development threat. You can see Connecticut is pretty red, and the woods of Maine, in contrast, are not. So there is a great chance of forest conversion in southern New England where pressure on the land is higher, land values are higher, which is why it's extra important to think about it, because we can't, a resilient New England does not involve a built out southern New England and a wild northern New England. That's not going to look anywhere. It's the way it's here looking forward. We have a little dashboard on our website, which would encourage you to check out. It's pretty, it's updated frequently, and this is showing of those different land use needs, wildlands, woodlands, farmlands, and communities, where Connecticut is right now. Again, easier to explore online than on a big screen like this. But this is the top line is sort of the amount of protected forests. In dark green is 16% in Connecticut and just about 1% of protected wildlands in Connecticut. And the goal, getting to sort of Connecticut's contribution to that New England-wide vision, is much more ambitious. We're going to refer to sort of expanding the total acreage of conserved lands as progress from here to there throughout the course of the morning. You can have wildlands that aren't old growth forests, and Susan's going to talk about the distinction between those in a second. but I wanted to take a second to emphasize why, in particular, we're focusing on policy protections for old growth forests. I would guess if we surveyed the room, there would be a lot of different reasons people have in mind for why it's important to protect the oldest trees and oldest stands of forests in a particular area. They would probably range from habitat protection to indigenous cultural tradition to carbon sequestration, watershed protection, all sorts of benefits. The one that I highlighted here is a study that I just found pretty recently from last year that says if we just protected mature old growth forests around the country from commercial timber harvest, that would increase the accumulated forest carbon stocks by an equivalent of 8 years of our national carbon emissions. So like stopping that development, keeping those forests as mature old forests alone is a massive and very cheap strategy to meeting our national decarbonization and climate goals. The cheapest climate strategy that we know of is to let trees keep growing. And the policy around that, both locally and nationally, is kind of bizarrely controversial and ineffective when you just consider that basic fact of how simple and easy it is to let trees grow. I find that a really compelling argument. I hope it resonates with other folks too. Cool. So Susan's going to jump up now. We're going to sort of give a framework of where this is in Connecticut and talk about the distinction between wetlands and old growth forests, and then we'll start on our New England tour, hear a little bit more about waste. So move forward.
All right. Thank you, Alex. So as Alex said, Susan Messino. In my job, I'm a professor of applied science at Trinity College. And I'm here today as the Hartford County Coordinator for the Old Growth Forest Network. I'm also a co-author on the recent major report, Wildlands in New England, Past, Present, and Future, which is talking about where is our current and future old growth forests in New England. And I'm also on the board of Atten Forest in Norfolk, Connecticut. So what I wanted to start out with is just some definitions of what we're talking about so we don't get stuck in being confused about that. So the definition of wildlands in this report, which is all online with a lot of resources and graphs and data, it's like a small phone book. And I have some copies of the executive summary at the table in the exhibit area. So how wildlands were defined was tracts of land of any size and current condition, permanently protected from development, so that's one key criteria. And then the second key criteria is areas where management is intended to allow natural processes to prevail with minimal interference. So in wildlands, so I want to make this very, very clear, you can deal with invasives, you can have trails, you can deal with public safety, you can even hunt. You could do things that you need to do, but the intent is that it is a natural area. So those things are not banned. It's just like do what you need to do. And so it also acknowledges that we've been part of the landscape and we can share our lives with the land without always manipulating and extracting from every inch of the landscape. And the science that's been coming out internationally about why this is so important is something I don't have time to cover with you today, but it's really, really important. And all different fields are coming to the same conclusion about this. And so the bottom line is we need areas which are dedicated from the soil, the microbiome, up to the sky, where we're letting natural processes adapt and evolve. This is our common lifeline. And if we don't reckon with that this is what is keeping us all going, are these natural systems, we're basically missing the plot as environmentalists, as a conservation community, and as an ethically and scientifically competent society. We need to understand what we're doing where and why, and we need to understand that we cannot leave every inch of our landscape open to being logged, burned, sprayed, cleared, etc. Because that is the basically the basis of life on Earth, which includes us, is the biota and how all the microbiome is under the soil, the ability of particularly large forests to move water across land, to keep life on land habitable and support everything else. It's so critical. And plus it's beautiful and it gives people places to fall in love with and have some refuge and respite and deal with the really serious issues we have with mental illness and anxiety and depression and connecting across generations to the land that we all need. So just to give you an example of an area that should be on the wildlands map, this is a little area in Hartford, the North Branch of the Park River. This is what Mary Pelletier of Park Watershed calls the last landscapes in some of our cities in Hartford. Incredible old forest right in Hartford. Some of the trees there predate the Revolutionary War. And I know that there's been a lot of talk in Connecticut about riparian corridor protection. This is public land in Hartford with this incredible old forest, a beautiful little place for people to get away from the sights and sounds of the city, which was the mission of Frederick Law Olmsted with his parks. It has no special protection. These special places have no special protection. This is what we should all be getting on the same page with, and like I said, what are we doing where and why? If you just look at the Connecticut environmental conditions online, Connecticut Eco, we have a number of identified critical habitats in Connecticut. 25 were identified, and old growth forest was identified as one of those habitats. So I want to very specifically define old growth forest, which often gets confused with primary forest or virgin forest. So a primary or virgin forest is a forest that's never been cut. In New England, that happen to be typically maybe private land areas, areas that are too difficult to get to because we basically cleared most of the landscape. Old growth forests could be, a primary forest would qualify as old growth, but it also could be a second growth forest. It's basically grown for a long time. It's starting to recover some of the structural and functional features of old growth forests. And the definition in Connecticut was it hasn't undergone human disturbance during their developmental cycle. Some other definitions that have been bandied about were trees 150 years of age or older, essentially half the lifetime of some of the trees in the forest. But the good news is the U.S. Forest Service came out, and I'm not expecting you to read this, but this is a table that comes directly from the U.S. Forest Service 2024 report, which defined old growth forests in each region. So we're in Region 9, and so the criteria for the U.S. Forest Service definition of old growth forest in Region 9 is it has to be, depending on, these are all different forest types, so it has to be a stand age. The ages range from 100, 101 to 161. So it's starting to develop those structural and functional characteristics. A certain number of trees per acre, going from 5 up to 20, so it qualifies as forest, and some trees that are of a certain diameter. So between, depending on the forest type, 12 to 20 inches or higher. So it's basically an old forest that has a certain number of trees of a certain size, qualifies it for this definition. And Connecticut basically has a lot of the old forests in New England. We have something really special here. And so I think we really need to, understand that and consider where are the areas that we're going to be protecting going forward. So this is just a photo to just, I think it just exemplifies some of the beautiful things that we have in New England, and ultimately the question we need to grapple with are where are the places that people can count on as a natural area, which are also the places that are adapting, evolving, and supporting everything that we need. And with that, I will turn it back to, policies around New England.
Because we're gonna
Oh yeah.
put this together. Great. So we're gonna look at three New England states and how they're addressing old growth forest protection policy in different contexts. We're gonna look at Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts. The goal here is maybe to introduce some of the ideas that have galvanized some momentum in different political contexts, recognizing that the Connecticut policy landscape is different and the forest landscape is different. There are some technical fixes that some states are exploring. There's some research projects being baked into state policy, and there's some more ambitious and visionary forest protection work going on. We're gonna do a quick tour. Feel free to ask some questions. I wrote about these in the publication we put out online. You can use the QR code and probably Google this about it too if you want to read some more. I'm gonna start with Maine. Almost impossible to see this. So considering the size of the forest in Maine, it feels a little silly that we're just now getting to the identification of where the oldest forests in Maine are, but it's also very complicated because of the size of Maine. There's 10 million acres of unorganized territories which have no municipal government and essentially no people, largely owned by 4 private companies. The image here is on the right, is LiDAR imagery conducted by a group of researchers at Our Climate Common. Every 30 years they do an updated bird study, so they're mapping out habitat, and when they did it most recently, using LiDAR lasers from airplanes, they figured out that some of the spots in the map came out as a different color than the rest, and they wondered why, and that's because the diversity in canopy height in those darker colored spots is so far exactly correlated with where oldest forests in Maine are. So with airplanes and lasers, now we know where the pockets are in 10 million acres of unorganized territory in Maine. And so now John and Ben, the scientists behind it, have been going in ground truthing of finding these little pockets and verifying whether or not they are and how at risk of development they are. An example here is, I'm just going to read it. This little, so B2 down here, that's, I think it's like a 400 or 500 acre stand, if I'm remembering correctly. That's in the middle of nowhere, owned by a logging company. For some reason, they didn't get to it yet. And they went out on the ground after identifying it with LiDAR and found a 250-year-old red spruce that was just there. Like, that's the age of this stand, and it's slated for harvest. It's actually already been harvested. It was harvested in 2024. So like the gap between finding those forests and protecting them is massive, but finding them is still a big project. The policy implications of this are that because now there's the data, or there's a new set of data that identify where the oldest stands are in Maine. There was a bill introduced in the last session to first prioritize conservation projects that have old trees on them. That feels like a no-brainer. Might as well give them a few extra points in the state-funded conservation programs. And then second, to require our Forest Service to report on how is it going? How are we doing with conserving these forests? And either bringing them into public ownership or putting permanent protections on them. Surprise, surprise, that bill was voted down because of strong advocacy from the Forest Products Council and the State Forest Service, which said it would be too much money to do that kind of report. Instead, it was pushed a year, and now private philanthropy has funded that report, so the report's going to happen, and we have to try again to sort of move the needle in the public momentum to get that codified into state funding policy. I know there are state conservation programs in Connecticut that are funding the acquisition of forests, easements, and forests in fee ownership. You could imagine a scenario in which the state decides to give preference to those projects that do meet some of the old definitions that Okay, sorry, almost done. Here's a Vermont example that's very different in its scale. So Vermont, all New England states have a current use program. It's A490, and in Vermont it's the Use Value Assessment Program. If you're not familiar, forest owners can enroll their land in one of these programs. They get a big discount on their property tax bill as long as they keep forests as forests. In Vermont, until 2 years ago, I think, to have your forest enrolled in this program and to get those discounts on your property tax bill, you needed to be actively managing your forests and you'd be harvesting for commercial production as an intent. They changed that 2 years ago while it was implemented last year, where they added a different category, not where you can just chill out and let your forest grow, but you can manage your forest for old growth characteristics. So a little bit closer towards allowing for passive management. It's on a very limited subset of lands that you can enroll it. We don't know how many landowners even qualify for this or how many have enrolled yet. There's a report coming this year mapping out the impact of that. But I introduce it here because PA 490 is a program that exists in Connecticut. It's very different than Vermont. You don't have to actively manage your forests in PA 490. But there are some current use programs that incentivize people to manage their land towards a specific goal or outcome. And so what would it look like if you get an extra 5% reduction in your assessed value if you put a forever wild easement on your property? Like there are ways to tweak the existing program and infrastructure towards a public goal if the public wants to do that. This is like a pretty technical change to Vermont's program. And finally, I think we can zoom back out with our vision.
Thanks. I'm Michael Kellen. I'm Executive Director of Restore the North Woods. We're a nonprofit organization. We're based in Massachusetts, but we have members all across New England and beyond. And I've been working on New England forest issues for, 30 plus years. So I've sort of seen things come and go. I've seen what has worked, what hasn't worked. And so that has a lot to do with what I'm spending my time on. And so the things that we've heard so far are more incremental, smaller scale sorts of things that can happen at the local level or with private philanthropy and so forth, all of which are really important. And they need to be happening even more so. But what I've been working on is sort of jumping to the next quantum level, looking at large-scale protection of existing public lands and then expanding public lands. And other people are working on that too, but we really need a lot more focus on that piece of the puzzle as well as the other pieces. So one example, in Vermont, there's a bill right now that would designate 268,000 acres, so about 66% of Vermont state lands as basically wildlands that would be following the definition that Susan talked about, which would expand the base of wildland protection in Vermont to an additional 3%. That still only gets them up to about 7%. Wilderness areas and Green Mountain National Forests. But beyond that, there's very little permanently protected. We're talking about permanent protection. So the lands that have protection from development, mining, urban sprawl, whatever, that's all good. But most of those lands don't have permanent protection from logging, clearing, agriculture, etc. Which are not necessarily bad things if they're done in the right place at the right time, but we need more places that don't have those things going on, and that's a sure. So this bill, there's a lot of pushback, as Alex pointed out. In Maine, the same thing as in Maine. In Vermont, there's a lot of pushback against this, even though we're talking about a very small portion of the landscape. There's growing support for this bill in Vermont, and there's some hope that it may pass in some form. We'll see. So in Massachusetts, just like Vermont, there's some incremental stuff going on, as in the anti-sprawl efforts in Vermont. Massachusetts is focusing on trying to expand reserves on private lands and helping to fund land trusts buying and protecting lands in Massachusetts as reserves. Now, there are a couple shortcomings to this. One is that land is really expensive. This kind of land is really expensive in Massachusetts, so we're really not talking about a gigantic amount of land. These are really important pieces, and a lot of them connect bigger pieces, so it's not like it's not important, but this only takes you so far. And also, it's not assured that these areas will be permanently protected as wildlands. Some of them probably won't. But again, this is a good thing, and it's moving us more in the right direction. At the same time, I've been working on legislation, state legislation, that would designate about 160,000 acres of state-owned lands. These are lands that are already public lands as reserves, which are largely wildlands. Some of them are, they're wilderness because they have some of them have roads going through them and whatever, but they would be off limits to resource extraction and other human management unless there's a real need for, say, invasive species control or something like that, which could be done in a very low impact way. But this would involve most state forest lands, all watershed lands, and unbelievably, for example, you may be familiar with the Quabbin Reservoir in central Massachusetts, as it's the largest public land tract in southern New England. It's about 80,000 acres in the watershed of this reservoir, and they're logging. And they claim it's necessary for water quality, but actually, when pressed, there was a state study that was done looking at forests and climate, and they acknowledged it's not necessary to log for water quality. And so we're saying, well, so let's make these lands reserves. And then wildlife management areas, they're doing all kinds of intensive management for early successional habitat for species that really don't need it because there's tons of that kind of habitat. But we're saying, okay, if their job is to manage wildlife, we're talking about a third of the wildlife management areas in Massachusetts. So the other 2/3, they can do whatever they think they need to do to manage the wildlife. But a third would be, which is 50,000 acres, would be preserved. These bills we've had these cycle through several sessions now. Each time we get more public support, we get more media coverage, we get more legislators supporting it. So I'm feeling optimistic in the longer run. I don't know this session, there's a possibility some of this will get rolled into language at the state level that's good, that probably will pass, so we'll see. But the positive thing is Massachusetts, about 15 years ago when we started working on this, nobody was paying attention to these issues at all. It was not on the table. There was no legislation to protect anything. The state wasn't paying that reserves thing I showed you from Massachusetts. That's a new program, basically as a result of these bills. So you can shift things. It may take a little time, but the public really, I think, is on our side on these issues. We can really advocate and show them possible ways to do it. Okay. Go for it.
All right, so back to Connecticut, and I want to give a shout out to Jack Ruddick, a WPI Worcester Polytechnic student from Connecticut, who during the pandemic went around and first he looked at the aerial maps of Connecticut from 1935, and he looked at where there were forests on those aerial maps, and he went to those places to see if the forest was still there now. Basically surmising that if there was a forest there 100 years ago, maybe it was still there now and would qualify as an old-growth forest. So or a primary forest even. So through that process, Jack more than doubled the amount of forests that we knew about as old-growth forests in Connecticut. So it was a remarkable effort. And now I want to tell you two kind of caveats that I have, and I already told Alex that I was going to say these things. I actually don't like the term old growth forest because really what we need are self-sustaining, self-regulating ecosystems that are allowed to adapt and evolve. And I think we get overly hung up like how old is old growth and what if it gets blown down by a storm or whatever. Old growth forests have trees of all ages. They have storm-induced gaps, or due to bugs or fires or whatever. It's basically a mosaic of all kinds of habitat, that we use a name that makes it sound like it may be some really old spooky thing that maybe is gonna, die because it gets too old. But this is actually, what I'm talking about with wildlands. Where are we allowing natural processes to prevail? The other thing I want to mention is there really wasn't, and I'm just going to be very direct, there was no science behind saying that we need 7% wildlands in New England. It was just a number. And if you look at the science on this issue, scientists of multiple disciplines internationally have said we need 30 to 50% of our land and water maintained in a natural or near natural condition to kind of keep the mothership running. So it's actually very scary that we have no plan for that anywhere. And if you look at the International Sustainable Development Goals, which there's 30 goals, a big international report, there is no nature in those goals. They're all talking about sustainable use. And I would say that given the timelines and complexity of these natural systems, which we don't fully understand, we don't actually know if anything we're doing is sustainable right now. And I'll just leave that there. If we want to say, where are the wildlands in southern New England? So this is areas that could be current old growth or intended to be future old growth because it's a wildland. And in New England, unless the area is too rocky or wet or sandy, our land tends to grow a forest. So if an area is a wildland and prioritized for natural processes, it will become a forest. And so what this map shows, I don't think my pointer's working, but that's all right. What this map shows is just basically the little crumbs that we have. So in Massachusetts, those green areas are mostly the state forest reserves that are on the map. There's a couple of other pieces. One's a special Audubon area, but that's mostly what we have. And the problem is that those are state lands, but the Forest Reserve Program is an administrative policy, and it could be reversed with the swipe of a pen by the governor or other mechanisms. So if we remove the areas that only have temporary protection as a wildland, all of those areas are removed, and the amount of land that is protected as an intended natural area, which has an explicit intent for that, is 0.24% of Massachusetts. We're looking to put more land on the map because we think there is some land that has that intent that isn't on the map right now. So we're trying to kind of knit this together. Michael's saying, let's do legislation to make these areas permanent. Let's find the pieces in between that we can kind of knit this together and make this a functional long-term landscape. This is critical. The same thing in Connecticut. Most of the crumbs that you see in Connecticut are old forest management sites within our state forest system. There's also, you can see the Appalachian Trail is in that yellow line on the western edge. There's some National Park Service land along the Appalachian Trail. So some of that land has more permanent protection. I just want to mention Rhode Island. If you can see Rhode Island, we only were able to find, and we means a team of over 100 people and organizations, etc., that contributed to this little phone book report. And I worked on this. I worked to find as much land as I could to put on the map. And when this whole project was done, I was totally shocked that there's nothing. Rhode Island, you can only find 20 acres of Rhode Island that has an intent for natural processes. So I think this is a problem we should be talking about. And similarly, I mentioned that Massachusetts is vulnerable, even in places on the map right now, because it's an administrative policy. That's considered weak protection. A strong kind of protection would be a statute, a deed, a forever wild easement. Those would all be kind of stronger legal protection. Weak protection would be a policy, a management plan, those kinds of things that can be reversed. And so if we look at land that has strong protection in Connecticut, Connecticut is basically blank except for a few little pieces in the northwest corner, maybe one other piece in southern Connecticut. So we're down to, right now, what's on the map is less than 1%. If the temporarily protected, weakly protected lands are removed, we're at 0.26%. That's it. So the good news is we have a lot of opportunities. And first, I just wanted to show you a couple of examples of wildlands in Connecticut, which have fairly strong intent. One is the Canaan Mountain Wilderness Natural Area. This was protected in 1972, and it's one of 2 wildlands protected by state statute. It's in the state's Natural Area Preserve Program. So this is a really special place, and it's one of the places I was pointing to in northwestern Connecticut. Another place is in Simsbury, in my town, Belden Forest. It's right in the center of town. It's only 40 acres. It was protected by donor intent. 2 women donated this forest to the town, and they wanted it to remain in a heavily wooded condition. We have it under a management policy called Natural Area Stewardship, which is a very common sense policy. It's science-based, it's all referenced, I'm happy to share it. It's on the CLCC website, resource page, as well as a Forever Wild easement. So the CLCC website has the Natural Area Stewardship policy on their resources page, which is a free management plan that you can use. And it also has a model easement for a Forever Wild easement. So Belden was the first forest that was added, the first forest in Connecticut that was added to the Old Growth Forest Network in 2019. And I think it's so wonderful because it's right in the center of town, but you feel like you're a million miles away. It's right next to the library. It's right on the bus line. It's, it's just very accessible, and it's magical when you're in there. So in Connecticut, just briefly, and we want to leave plenty of time for questions, we have a number of opportunities to kind of engage with this question and address this lack of wildlands on the landscape. Of course, land trusts can play a role, and I would encourage every land trust to look at your land portfolio. I'm sure you have some land that might be farmland. It might be a meadow, it might be pollinator habitat, it may be grassland habitat, it may be land that you're intending as a woodland that you're going to be harvesting wood. All of those things are fine, but is there any land in your portfolio that you're intending as a natural area? And if so, make that intent explicit, because if you don't make that intent explicit through either a plan or a policy or an actual legal easement, I'm pretty confident that it's just a matter of time before there'll be a change in the board, or there'll be some kind of incentive, or some reason that you're going to be pressured to do something with that land. There's a number of reasons why that's true. One of them is we just seem to get money for doing stuff. It's hard to get money just to take data and just to protect our common lifeline. There doesn't seem to be money for that. There's a lot of money for doing things. And I think we need to really reckon with that issue. Towns could play a role. A lot of towns have incredible town forests. So you can talk to your town. Everyone in Simsbury is happy. We have a lot of different types of land in our portfolio. We picked 7 properties as the low-hanging fruit that were obviously areas that we intended for natural processes, because they're related to our trap rock ridges. They're related to those critical habitats that we talked about. They're already super old forests. They're related to our water, and we should be organizing our landscape around natural areas and water. It's critical. At the state level, the state is in the process of revising their green plan. So the green plan could make these goals more specific. We have a long history in terms of wilderness area protection in some areas, and also a natural area preserve program. That program right now is functionally dead because a committee doesn't exist, and if there isn't a committee, properties can't get entered into it. So reviving that program would be a mechanism to start to identify some of these special areas and get them in the natural area preserve program. And the other mechanism is those pieces on the landscape in Connecticut now are primarily parts of state forests that have been designated old forest management sites. So those are properties that, areas that are intended to be allowed to be old forest. Federally, we don't have a lot of federal land in Connecticut, but there are a number of ways that federal policies could help this. And even though there's not much happening to help this right now, I think we need to be aspirational. And this isn't just about Connecticut, this isn't just about New England, this is a global issue of where are we protecting nature and why. And so we need countries to be leaders in trying to identify why this is important and where is it going to be. And those conversations are not happening. So, I am going to, I do want to say one thing, that Michael Kellett and I were invited to a major international meeting in April 2024 in Munich called Embracing Nature's Complexity, How to Communicate the Value of Water and Climate Regulating Ecosystems. It included experts in farming, forestry, physics, landscape restoration from all different countries, and it was a really incredible conference that opened with a film about the return of old-growth forests in New England. And people at that conference, they were from Russia, Africa, Europe, the Amazon. They were just starstruck at the beauty we have in New England. And they said, this is your Amazon. This is incredible what you have here. And I worry that we risk taking this precious gift that we have for granted. And I want to say to everyone that, we're all scientists. We can use common sense. It doesn't make I know the science behind this, but just as a matter of common sense, it doesn't seem like a good idea that we leave every inch of the earth, which is like our skin, open to being manipulated and extracted from. It's just incredibly dangerous from just a common sense perspective. And I just want to mention two quotes by Frank Egler, who was the founder of Baton Forest in Norfolk. One is, and I probably won't get this right, is that nature is not only more complicated than we think, it's more complicated than we can think. And so I am comfortable with that because in my job, I'm a neuroscientist, and I know that I'm not going to understand the human brain. I think we often think we have more knowledge than we do, which is a very dangerous place to be. Another quote that I just read very recently was, he said, I don't think we're going to make any progress on anything until we have a president who's an ecologist or an ecologist who's the president, which really kind of struck me because one thing that I've been scared by is that we don't have any deep biological or ecological expertise at the top levels of our decision makers. It's really scary. And without that, we are just keep on getting delayed, buffeted around reasons, excuses, etc. And so, all of us need to grapple with this and start to become more literate and clear in being able to say, we need some areas for nature. That's not against anyone, it's for everyone. And so, Rosalind Franklin, science and everyday life cannot and should not be separated. I really strongly believe this. And this little GIF I'm going to show you, oops, maybe it's not going to play. This is it actually moves when you click it, if it clicks. It's basically showing that the earth that we have at the top is kind of buffered from extremes by the biota, by life on Earth. our planet is actually physically unstable and would be kind of rocketing from being icy and burning, and it's very physically unstable. The biota itself is what is stabilizing and mitigating those extremes. And the more we damage the genetic and functional competence of the biota, the more we are wrecking this buffering system and making things more unstable. So it's not just the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the greenhouse gases. It is the biota itself that serves to stabilize the weather patterns, the ability to move water across land. And as we all know, flooding is our greatest climate risk in New England. And so the way that we keep our region more stable is we allow these natural systems to move water across land, spread water out, slow it down, and sink it into our aquifers, our groundwater, our streams, etc. It's vitally important. We're not even talking about it. So I would just say for my last slide, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Michael. I mean, these are essential things. Where are we protecting our lifeline of nature that's held in our land and water? Because life supports life, and this is a vitally important question. It's not optional. And I'd like to bring Michael Kellett up to share a little bit more about a grander plan to try and address this question.
Yes, so we're talking at various levels what we can do to restore and protect natural systems. That leaves a big gap in the discussion, because there's virtually no discussion of large-scale protection in the United States. There have been efforts to create national monuments, which are almost all out west, because that's where existing federal lands are. In the east, this shows you how unbalanced our current protection is. So this map shows existing national parks by the number of national parks per state by the size of the circle. And these are full national parks. So this is like Acadia, Yellowstone, Great Smoky Mountains. There are other national park area managed units, but those are not full national parks. They're usually not large. They usually don't get the attention. So less than 13% of the U.S. is protected as national parks or wilderness areas or similar protection. So as we've mentioned, scientists think we need about 30 to 50% of the planet with substantial protection from extraction and development and so forth. In the U.S., it's about 13%. And there's no plan to expand that in any serious way on a national scale. And in fact, right now we've got policies that are trying to erode that. And the East is virtually, it's not even 1%. It's way lower. And there are lots of ecoregions, ecosystems across the country that have virtually no protection whatsoever, especially in the East. And as most of you probably have experienced, because we only have 63 of these full national parks, the existing parks tend to get heavily used. 300 million people a year, visitors. Some people go more than once, visit the national park system areas across the country each year. So these are a lot of people. And this is the benefit of national parks. Everybody knows what a national park is. National parks automatically do a lot of the things that we're fighting right now to do from a policy standpoint. So if you want to protect biodiversity, national parks don't allow development except limited recreational development. They don't allow logging, mining, grazing, urban development. So they automatically protect land from that. They automatically protect endangered species because they don't allow hunting or they allow very, very carefully managed hunting in national preserve areas. They preserve carbon and climate resiliency because they keep natural systems intact and undeveloped. So you automatically do a lot of stuff when you create a national park. So we have proposed, our organization, in consultation with a lot of grassroots groups across the country, 100 new national parks across the country. That would include every state would have at least one park. I don't have it here, but it would this would triple the size of the existing national park system and get us to, right now I mentioned we have 13% protection across the country. This would raise the level to about 20%, which still isn't 30%, but it would be a big jump. Most of these lands are already publicly owned lands. Most of them are not well protected or not protected as much as they need under current ownership and management. So most of this means transferring lands to public agencies from one agency to another. In some cases, like the Maine Woods up in Maine, those are, as we've talked about, they're almost all big timber and paper company lands, so those would need to be acquired. The good news is they'd be happy to sell them if we had a couple $2 billion, so 2 days of the Iran war would take care of that. Among the parks we're proposing, 10 of them are in New England. And it seems, when you first think about it, it seems really kind of crazy. How could you have new national parks in New England? Well, the reality is you've got existing national forests. There are 2 national forests which should be national parks and could be designated as national parks. There's the Maine Woods, which I mentioned. There are 3 areas that potentially could better protect lands in Connecticut. We don't have time to go into detail, but these would, a number of these would be partnership type parks, where it would be a partnership between the National Park Service, the states, municipalities, land trusts, and it would be a voluntary, mutually beneficial thing, because there are some of these kinds of parks scattered in various places across the country where and the benefit to the state and local communities is it brings federal support, federal information, federal education programs from the National Park Service, and it helps to coordinate management amongst a bunch of different disparate pieces. So this is part of what we're proposing. And one of the areas where this would involve, we're talking about a visionary approach, not the standard draw a big square and call it Yellowstone, which is a great park, but you can't do that anymore anywhere really. But here's Keeney Park in Hartford. This would potentially be a part of a Connecticut River National Park, which would involve a number of different small core areas along the river corridor. Frederick Law Olmsted designed this park. He was one of the founders of the national park idea. He was a visionary, and so that would be an appropriate piece of a new national park in Connecticut. So anyway, I will leave it at that, and we'd be happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I think we have lots of time for questions. I want to go off book and try to tie these things in one more way before we do it. I live in Portland, Maine. In January, there was a big ice enhanced operation, it was called, where a bunch of people were apprehended and the whole community sort of blew up politically. We went to an organizing meeting with community members, and I'm going to tell you, and everyone was sort of paralyzed and thinking about what to do. There's rapid response work, there's mutual aid work, there's lobbying our elected officials, there's protesting on overpasses. And someone said, what we need right now is an ecosystem of response. And so that stuck with me over the last couple months, recognizing that there are a lot of ways to see how I fit as a member of a community, or as I fit as a person who cares about forests, and to recognize the scope of the work that needs to be done can be really intimidating. And I wanted to bring it up because if we consider ourselves as part of that ecosystem of response, there may be a piece of this that feels easy and accessible and like close to what we care about and what we're good at, and finding that particular avenue, whether it's changing the management of a land trust property to creating 100 new national parks, or even more ambitious than that. Like there's a piece of that that I hope we can all identify as doable and achievable as we build towards this thing that feels totally impossible sometimes. So it's kind of a weird, super depressing and inspiring way to try to tie that all together, but I hope some of that resonates. And I still don't really know if I believe in what I just said, so I'd be happy to talk about it. But yeah, great question, let's do it.
So you had really good specific numbers about natural areas that should be designated in Vermont and Massachusetts. We have that kind of number in Connecticut, like how many acres, where should it be, and can we have a bill that says it?
The short answer is no, but it's it's a doable. It's something that could be done. I would suggest we should think about, like I said, the critical pieces on our landscape. There have been bills introduced in the past, one was to protect old growth forest in Connecticut, and at that point there was some of the questions were, well, we don't know what it is, we don't know where it is, etc. But there's been a few developments since then. The publication of the Wildlands report, was a big kind of step to look at the science and the history of the region. The U.S. Forest Service just publishing those new definitions, which gives us something more specific. The realization that how lacking we are in these natural areas on the landscape, I think should be a big kind of wake up call. So right now we have the riparian corridor bill, which I'm not intimately familiar with, but I think we really should start to, in our policies, just to get things moving forward, is differentiate public versus private land. If it's public land, we should be really aspirational about what we're doing with it. And if it's not a natural area, why? Is it because it's a meadow? Is it because it's a woodlot? Is it because of this? We need to kind of flip the conversation and give these natural areas a priority on our landscape. And so having clarity about that and understanding that this is for everyone, it's not against anything, is really important. And one of the things that came up at the international conference we were at, because I said there were farmers there were people restoring landscapes, all kinds of things. I'm the president of my local range. I'm completely supportive of farmers. So whatever else it is that you do, I am asking you to be able to say that nature is important too, even if it's not the primary thing that you're doing. It's really important to raise the level of the conversation of this issue and make it a common goal, not something that's divisive and not something that's used to avoid doing anything. The idea that we don't know what it is, or we don't know what we're going to do, or we're going to make a plan, and all, like, what are we doing? We need to get some clarity around this issue. So anyway.
Well, it would be helpful to have some actual language and actual goals to use when we're talking about it.
Yeah, well, so there's nothing on the table right now, but I think that would be a good goal. And I think the goal of what percentage of land or what type of land, it's going to be different. Connecticut's a very differentiated state in terms of like cities and suburban areas and rural areas. So how this would translate to the landscape would be different depending on the community and what types of land was there.
You know, in terms of the prioritization for the project.
Yeah, that's a separate thing that I don't want to get into.
Yeah, sure.
Are there reliable ways that lay people can identify old growth or late successional forests without having to pour trees or do any kind of methods like that?
Yeah, so if you come to the Old Growth Forest Network table, which we're sharing with Restore, there's a really cute little half page called the Big Old Forest Scavenger Hunt, which is kind of gives you the characteristics that are in old forests, and you could even just bring your little half sheet of paper and do your own scavenger hunt.
that you,
What are some of the ways that normal people can get involved in regional and state policy?
So if you want kind of a broader look at it, I would recommend getting on Restore's mailing list, because they'll send updates on events and things like that. If you wanna do something, ask your town, do we have any natural areas, in our town, or your local land trust? I think that those would be good, kind of immediate steps. Michael, do you have anything to add about that?
Well, I didn't have a slide, I should have had a slide with a QR code, but if you come to the table that Susan just mentioned, there's a little half sheet that has QR codes, and you can check out our website, the Restore the Northwood website, which has information on some of this stuff that I was just talking about. We're gonna be, it's in cyberspace now, but we have a website, newparks.org, which is going to be all about the 100 areas, why, how, where. We got a little bit about it on our Restore the North Woods website, but it's not fleshed out like it will be on the other one. So, but the QR code's there, the website's there, it just says under construction, so gotta get it up and running.
And I'll just add, if the regionalness of it is appealing, every November, the Regional Conservation Partnership Network has a free one-day conference in Amherst, which is designed for land trusts that are partnering across some kind of border, towns or states or England, that have an established partnership to come talk about how that regional partnership works and what makes it useful. That's a neat way to find out doing things that that's good.
Okay, I add one thing to that is that Massachusetts, we've been working on this legislation for almost a decade now. Vermont has started up recently, their own. There's no reason why Connecticut groups can't, we just took the bull by the horns. A couple of us literally just wrote these bills and got them introduced into the legislature and then asked for other organizations to support them. And we got news coverage, we got, pushback and support, and they haven't passed yet, but there's no reason Connecticut can't do the same thing that we did. And there probably are members of the legislature who would be sympathetic. They probably don't know that much about any of the details of this stuff, but there probably are some who would be willing to listen and interested. And I'm sure there are organizations across Connecticut who would be interested in thinking about some kind of statewide legislation. And you have, Massachusetts bill, they're not great, they're not perfect, but you can steal from that, you can steal from the Vermont people told us they stole from our Massachusetts bills, and we said, good for you, but there are models that can be used for this kind of thing. So, it's at some point you just do it, and that's what I would. But that's not. I probably won't be able to do it, but we would support such a bill. For example, our organization, we have members in Connecticut and across the region. We would be happy to support that kind of legislation. So.
I saw your hand, and were you next? Sure.
For some of us who have been defending our local forests, contending that leaving the forest alone is actually a healthier state for that forest than what's called sustainable forestry. And I'm wishing there could be a doctor or a group of people who could come in and make the case that these are all the reasons why town of whatever, this is why you should actually welcome the chance to leave your forest alone. And it will be actually healthier than the proposed sustainable forestry. Who wants that certification group that can reassure people who are fighting against, in some cases it's national forests, in New England it's our local forest, and so it's, deep, or state forestry, Vermont, is a case in point.
Earth first.
Okay.
So I guess there's no doctor for this. And you know, what your definition of forest health is, I mean, it depends on what your goal is for the forest. So that's why, and as I started to understand these issues after being, you know, involved in conservation work for many years, I realized that all these words have different meanings to different people and different goals. And so that's why I'm starting to understand the science related to climate and biodiversity and our own health and everything. That's why I partnered with a climate scientist and an ecologist to write that paper on pro-forestation, which just means where are we gonna let areas adapt and evolve? Some areas need to be that. The difficult thing is if you try and talk about this, you know, sometimes it's just immediately people are misunderstanding that, oh, you don't ever wanna cut a tree, or you don't understand X, Y, and Z, and all that kind of stuff. And I think we need to get past those kinds of excuses to not have that conversation and get past these false divisions and straw men. I'm the president of my local Grange. I've written extensive public comments about where we should be doing what and why. So I'm not against anything. But I mean, I think we do need to have a more public conversation about the critical importance of natural areas. And I did start to assemble, it's very drafty, a QR code that has, you know, kind of upcoming events that show the beauty of what we have in New England. A number of films by New England Forests, Beaver Pond Wildlife, The Return of Old Grove, there's a number of films. There's, you know, if there's upcoming events, I'll throw them onto this little QR code. And I'll try and put on some talks that address what you're talking about, and maybe those could be some resources to share.
Another paper that Susan was a co-author of, and I was a co-author, which might be of help with what you're talking about, is we did a survey of 500 papers and reports and whatever, looking at, it's called Forest Clearing for Early Successional Habitat. It's available online, and that, the useful thing about that is we heard all the arguments about why everything, there are people who, they mean well, they think they know best, but they think everything needs to be managed by humans. Some better, you know, whatever, and there's just really no scientific basis to show that that makes sense, but they will, you know, say, I know better, or they may have some scientific, you know, science is not black and white, so you can interpret things, but what we did in our papers, we looked, is it really necessary in the Northeast to be cutting and thinning and burning and clearing standing forests? Now, we're not talking about natural meadows, keeping farmland open, anything like that. That makes sense in some cases. We're talking about if it's a forest, does it make sense to thin, cut, burn, whatever for wildlife, because wildlife need it. And we didn't find any species that whose survival and health required that to be done in the Northeast. And in fact, looking around the country, there are very few places anywhere where that makes any sense. But the point is, you don't have to be called, oh yes, you're a tree hugger, you don't understand the science, this is complicated, blah, blah, blah. You can pull out that report, and we have not gotten any feedback from, even though a lot of forest management people really don't like it, nobody has come up with any rebuttal of any of the things we stated in that study. And we had foresters, we had a team of people writing this report. So anyway, it's not a black or white thing, but there's a really good case to be made for leaving forests alone, as well as some management in certain places, but it needs to really be justified ecologically, not just, oh yeah, it's good for wildlife to do this. So anyway, that's, that, we could have had a QR code of that too, under thing, we probably should have done it. It's on in front, it's Pellet et al., Pellet, Massino, others, 2023, and it's on the Frontiers page.
We're gonna try to do 2 questions in 4 minutes, totally impossible, but you're in there.
I'll just make a comment that perhaps the legislation that we should be looking for is the legislation that would provide the means to do the analysis of the resource that you're talking about, that we don't have the information. We don't know where all these places are. We don't know the condition that they're in. We don't know who owns them. We showed a map with some public state-owned land that has been designated as natural areas. But if you add the land trust lands that would fit that category, and the private lands that have been in that category for years and years, and town-owned lands that are, you would probably find a lot more of it out there than what the map shows. But your point is well made that we don't know where it is or what condition it's in, and we need that analysis in order to logically come up with the numbers, the recommendations, the percentages and so forth and so on, what would make sense. And so that's the legislation that we should be asking for, is, that we had the governor appointed a GC3 panel to talk about climate change. There's no reason why the governor couldn't appoint a panel to do that kind of in-depth study of the
Yeah, I guess just to comment.
The fact of the matter is that there's a lot of other human benefits that we need to take into account. I've devoted my career to the notion that if private landowners derive some enjoyment, some benefit, some satisfaction from being a forest landowner, then the forest is less at risk of being converted. That's the big enemy, is not the logging, not the wildlife habitat management, but the conversion. And so we need to keep those people owning forest, whether it's young forest, or old forest, or disturbed forest, or not. We need to keep it intact as forest of some sort. That's the first thing. Then we can talk about invasive species.
But also, to be fair, there are 3 sessions in this conference and a working group at CLCC called Alex on policy. So it's not as if nothing's being done. There are a lot of people doing a lot, and there are a lot of people thinking about these problems at scale, from TNFD top down. So we're not dealing in a vacuum here.
No, and that's why I tried to show, we do know where a lot of our critical habitats are. We do know where our headwaters are. We do know in a lot of cases where our old forests are. So we have a lot of information already. But what I'm saying is those places don't have a special protection for natural processes. And we're not talking about that. And so CLCC is having a whole series of events on stewardship. And I'm going to talk to Amy. I think she should add one to the series that talks about this issue. I want to mention, I think I might have a copy of the paper that Michael mentioned in my bag of tricks, like random stuff I carry around. And one of the things that I want to point out is Alex mentioned a lot of assumptions that might not be right. There's a lot of issues with bad math that I don't have time to go into right now. But in terms of accounting for what's where in our landscape, there's some bad math associated with that. I think that would be another important thing to kind of grapple with in legislation.
And we can't let that be an obstacle to wait till we have good math to protect the spaces that are.
We already know.
And it's 12:15, and I'm really sorry to all of the people who hands up, but I'm not going to stand between people at lunch. We're going to be at the Old Growth Forest Member table. We'll be happy to talk to you. I'm sorry. You have to say for one thing. This is a code that CLCC wanted us to share earlier in the presentation. If you want to get feedback on the session, you'll see the code at other workshops too. Cool. Thank you so much.
Oh, I'm sorry.
For over 40 years, SCM
has been the voice of our town,
bringing us together through local programming,
education, and live broadcasts.
SCM isn't just about television.
It's about empowering our community,
ensuring our voices are heard during government meetings,
and celebrating milestones
like our high school graduations.
But today, SCM faces a challenge.
Our funding structure is based on television subscriptions.
And it's no secret, people have been cutting the cord.
With a shift to internet-only subscriptions,
SCM receives less revenue,
even though all our programming is freely available online.
We need your support.
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 Your donation can make a difference.
It will ensure that SCM remains open,
continues to educate our youth,
and keeps our community informed.
Thanks to SCM, I've been honing my creative skills, helping me work towards my college degree.
SCM is crucial for keeping our community connected.
SCM isn't just here to broadcast local events. They're actually preserving Simsbury's history.
Join us
in preserving Simsbury's voice.
Simsbury's voice.
Together we can ensure that SCM continues to thrive
for generations to come.
Visit our website
or scan the QR code on your screen to make your donation.
Every contribution
counts.
Thank you for supporting Simsbury Community Media,
where your town,
your schools,
and your government
come together.